This is a Fox News alert. We want to take you back live to Alabama, where Democrat Doug Jones is celebrating his victory, having been just elected to the U.S. Senate. Let's listen in. All right, we are going to work on that audio. Just stick with us a minute. He pulled off a race that just weeks ago many would have thought impossible. That was before allegations against Roy Moore, dating back decades in some cases, surfaced. And voters we saw today were really conflicted over whether or not they believed those allegations. We had a big number of voters actually tell us in our voter analysis that they stayed home because of the allegations. They chose not to vote at all. And you would think tonight that had to have helped Democrat Doug Jones. He is going through thanking his supporters and vowing to take Washington by storm. Let's listen in.
It's the volunteers who made 1.2 million phone calls around this state. It's those volunteers to make sure that we knew. It was every community. You know, I keep hearing about the different communities in this state. The African American community, thank you. My friends in the Latino community, thank you. To all my Jewish friends, happy Hanukkah. We have built this everywhere we have gone. We have had that same energy. We've had that same excitement. At the end of the day, this entire race has been about dignity and respect. This campaign has been about the rule of law. This campaign has been about common courtesy and decency and making sure everyone in this state, regardless of which zip code you live in, is going to get a fair shake in life. And let me just say this, folks, to all of my future colleagues in Washington, to all. I've had such wonderful help. But I want to make sure, in all seriousness, there are important issues facing this country. There are important issues of health care and jobs and the economy. And I would like, as everyone in the entire probably free world knows right now, we've tried to make sure that this campaign was about finding common ground and reaching across and actually getting things done for the people. So I have a challenge. I have this challenge to my future colleagues in Washington. Don't wait on me. Take this election from the great state of Alabama. Let me finish. Take this election where the people of Alabama said, we want to get something done. We want you to find common ground. We want you to talk. Take this opportunity in light of this election and go ahead and fund that SHIP program before I get up there. Put it aside and let's do it for those million kids and 150,000 here in Birmingham, Alabama. I am not going to talk too much longer. It's been a long night. It's been a long campaign. But let me just say, I know I've forgotten so much. I've forgotten so much. There's so many thank yous and how we feel. This vote, I've said it before. Alabama has been at a crossroads. We have been at crossroads in the past. And unfortunately, we have usually taken the wrong fork. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, you took the right road. personal level, let me tell you, and I said this at the top, and I do mean this. It seems, I want to thank each of you for helping me fulfill a lifelong dream of serving in the United States Senate that started out with my mentor, Howell Heflin, and ever since then, that has been my dream. Thank you for that. At the end of it, so as we approach this history, as we approach this crossroads, we have work to do. We have work to do in this state to build those bridges within this state, to reach across with those that didn't vote for us, to try to find that common ground. I'm pledging to do that tonight, but I will tell you, tonight is a night for rejoicing, because as Dr. King said, as Dr. King liked to quote, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, tonight in this time, in this place, you helped bend that moral arc a little closer to that justice, and you did it. That moral arc, not only was it bent more, not only was its aim truer, but you sent it right through the heart of the great state of Alabama in doing so. Thank you all. I love you. Thank you, and God bless you, and God bless the great state of Alabama and the United States of America. Thank you all.
All right, you've been listening to Democrat Doug Jones in Alabama, successfully pulling off a run for the U.S. Senate. He will be the next senator to join here in Washington with a lot on the plate for the GOP in 2018. How much will it cost them in losing that seat? First of all, let's talk before we hear from Roy Moore. We expect we will hear from him eventually, from Alabama's Secretary of State John Merrill. Let's talk about his reaction. Secretary, great to have you with us tonight. What can you tell us about turnout? Because we thought that was going to be so critical tonight.
Thank you, Shannon. It's unbelievable. The people of Alabama really responded in this campaign unlike anything was ever expected to have occurred. Actually, when you see exactly what happened with more than 1.2 million Alabamians participating, this is a record participation effort, and the people of Alabama are to be applauded for their encouragement and their support of both candidates and both campaigns.
Yeah, because we've talked a lot about this is not only a special election, it's a special election because it comes at an off time. It is part of a runoff now, and there have been so many competing stories and scandals and all these kinds of things. And that gets us to tonight. Now, you and I have had many conversations as this has unfolded the last few weeks about write-in votes. And I want to talk about something that comes from Steve Hayes, which I'm sure is from your office. He says Jones votes right now 640,520, Moore 631,576, so about 9,000 votes difference. Then he says write-ins were 22,044. Those folks who decided to have write-in votes instead of picking one of these candidates more than covered the margin by double. For them to take the time to go out and vote on a day when they knew that their write-in probably wouldn't matter, that seems like quite a statement from the folks of Alabama.
Well, it really is, Shannon, and it's very important to note that all of those write-in votes will be documented and recorded and printed, so it will be understood exactly who received those votes and what that will mean in the final difference. We've actually sent instructions to the probate judges a couple of times. We'll send them again tonight to make sure that they know that those votes are supposed to be counted, documented, and recorded, and we will have those in the information that will be received back by our office toward the end of this week, the first of next week.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the names that come up, and I would imagine we maybe see some Jeff Sessions and some other names there from Alabama, maybe Mo Brooks, others who were a part of that initial first larger election before getting us to this runoff. But are you surprised at all that people would cast a vote that they knew probably wouldn't impact the tally for one or the other of the two, but actually gave Doug Jones the huge advantage, the win here?
Well, certainly it looks that way, Shannon. And one of the things I think needs to be accepted from that is that the people of Alabama were trying to make a statement with those write-in votes, and they wanted to make sure that those votes were recorded and they were documented for the candidate of their choice other than one of the two candidates that were listed on the ballot.
Well, it's always interesting to me to see that data when it gets broken down and we really actually see the other names and the effort that people made to go to the polls on a day like today and not vote for one of the two main candidates. We look forward to that. When do you anticipate that information will be available, and when will you certify the results so that Doug Jones will be that step, one step closer to coming here to Washington to serve?
Sure, Shannon. One of the things that needs to be noted is that the provisional ballots that were cast today will actually be processed and counted next Tuesday. The information about the write-ins will also be processed and counted next Tuesday. That information needs to be back in our office by next Friday, the 22nd. The earliest that the vote can be certified will be the 26th day of December, and the latest will be January the 3rd. So within that window, there are a number of things that have to be processed and executed by the local offices in each one of the 67 counties, as well as our office in the Office of the Secretary of State. We need to make sure that everything is done according to plan to ensure that the integrity and preservation of the credibility of this process is secure.
Okay, so the man we now think is the senator-elect, though not officially without your certification, but Doug Jones, the man who appears to have won tonight, the Democrat, he's got a lot waiting for him here in Washington. But just so folks are reminded, this is essentially a 2-year term for him as he fills out the seat that was vacated by Jeff Sessions when he became the Attorney General. You know, 2 years out, a lot of people are already running for the seat. How do you think this will play out 2 years from now? Because this has been one of the most unusual, raucous campaigns that we've seen in a long time, and it seems like, you know, within months, the two sides are going to be looking at this as a fresh seat again.
Certainly it is, Shannon, and it's something that needs to be given a great deal of attention. A lot of people have said that if Doug Jones won, then basically what would happen is he would become the Scott Brown of Alabama. Of course, Scott Brown was serving in Massachusetts after Senator Kennedy's death, and he served for 2 years and then was defeated by Elizabeth Warren as she took that seat in the full term. So there are a number of things that can happen, but it's important to make sure that those continue to be processed according to the way that the people of Alabama intend for them to be processed. I also think that it's important to note that we need to make sure that we're giving attention to every detail, and Section 17-16-20 of our code also talks about an automatic recount provision, and it could be that Judge Moore's team will actually want to pay for a recount to occur for it being within half of 1%. The automatic recount happens when it's half of 1%, but depending on how it actually evolves at this point when those provisionals are counted, or to see how other things actually affect that, it could reduce that number a little bit more than it is now to make it half of 1%. And if that takes place, we'll follow state law in order to ensure the integrity and preservation of the credibility of the process. Yeah,
that's an important fact to look at as you go through these ballots and get to the final numbers. I'm not sure that your office is going to want to tackle that after all you have been through. I know you will do it dutifully, but I know you'd probably like to take a nap as well after the last few months.
Well, I tell you, it's been unbelievable. There's no doubt about that.
All right, Secretary Merrill, we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Shannon.
Okay, while we await now Roy Moore, we expect to hear a concession speech from him. We want to go back to Doug Jones' campaign headquarters in Birmingham. Our Doug McKelway has been there following this campaign all day. And Doug, you've been giving us updates throughout the day. The folks felt confident, even when numbers initially were not in their favor. They knew what they were looking for, and they felt pretty confident today, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case, Shannon. Doug Jones is still on the stage as we speak right now. He's waving to people, friends and volunteers here, just thoroughly enjoying the moment. This has been a quest of his since he was a young man and first got involved in politics. And not only is it victory night for Doug Jones, it's also his 25th wedding anniversary, as you might have heard during his victory speech tonight. He and his wife Louise are celebrating their 25th anniversary. And he paid homage to a really key guy who happens to be a familiar face to a lot of Fox News viewers, Joe Trippi, who was the mastermind behind his campaign. Joe, congratulations.
Thanks. We had a great team. It's a wonderful night.
What made this work?
I think the country really is looking for people to bring the country together to stop the division in Washington, and I think Doug Jones spoke to that, to finding common ground. A lot from his speech tonight, finding common ground, trying to work together across party lines. And, you know, there's not a lot of that going on in Washington. He's going to try to do that. I think people in Alabama responded to it.
So you are not of the mind that it was the sexual harassment accusations that ruined this. There were polls, I know, as far back as early summer that showed this was a dead heat.
Yeah, I'm not saying that had nothing. It didn't have anything to do with it, but we were in a dead heat. We were down 1 point long before the Washington Post stories or any of these allegations came out. It certainly didn't help him. I mean, you know, Moore's always had some trouble in the state too. Again, it worked almost against what people were looking for. He's seen as divisive. He was seen as controversial. They didn't want more of that in Washington. You still like Donald Trump?
Did you sense at any time that Moore was a not ready for primetime player? I recall a radio interview he did in early summer where the host asked him, "What's your position on the Dreamers?" And he didn't know what the Dreamers were.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. But again, I think people knew him in this state for a long time. I mean, he'd been removed from office twice already. He was a controversial figure. What they were looking for was somebody that was going to try to find common ground, try to work with other people in both parties, work with Senator Shelby, their other senator here. And I think, you know, Doug Jones, we reached enough people, he did, and that's what got us over the line.
This is a deeply, deeply red state. Is Doug Jones a one-term senator, or does this represent some kind of a sea change in Alabama politics?
I think we just won. You know, we'll see, but I think it will get down to how can he work across party lines? Can he actually bring people together? Can he work with Senator Shelby to get things done? If he can, I think this state will like that. That's what they wanted by electing him. So we'll see. That's certainly what he's going to try to do. Washington's a tough place to do that. Yeah. No one's kidding themselves, but I think that's what.
And I see that Senator Cory Gardner, Republican from Colorado, has already asked him to join the Republican caucus. Any chance of that happening?
I don't think that's going to happen, but I do think he'd join some a caucus to bring people together. I think he'd do that.
Well, Joe Tribby, this is quite a feather in your cap as well. Congratulations.
A lot of good people worked on this. It was a great team, and so I'm proud to just have been a part of it. Really, it's amazing.
Good to see you, Joe.
Good to see you.
Safe travels. Shannon, back to you.
All right, Doug McKelway live with the Doug Jones campaign there on a winning night for them. Okay, so with that win, the balance of power in the Senate gets even tighter for Republicans, 51 of them, 49 Democrats. What happens now? Tax reform is close on the agenda. Probably get that done. At least Republicans hope so before Jones shows up. But let's break it down now with Fox News politics editor Chris Steyerwalt. Good to see you tonight on a busy night, sir.
Howdy, ma'am.
Okay, I want to read the president's tweet that we just got in. He says, congratulations to Doug Jones on a hard-fought victory. The write-in votes played a very big factor, as we just talked about with the Secretary of State. But a win is a win. The people of Alabama are great, and the Republicans will have another shot at this seat in a very short period of time. It never ends. So in the meantime, though, for Chris, for the next 2 years, they're going to have a Democrat in that seat.
That was a very gracious tweet.
It is nice, right?
From the president, especially since, if you recall, after his preferred candidate lost in Virginia, he roasted the guy on Twitter in real time in the same evening, complaining about Ed Gillespie. This time he didn't denigrate Roy Moore, who, by the way, we recall, is not the candidate that the president wanted to win in the Republican primary. This is not the guy. Roy Moore was not the guy that Trump chose to win for the Republican primary. And guess what? And this is something that Steve Bannon and his acolytes are going to have to think about now. Donald Trump was right about the Alabama primary. Steve Bannon, the president's chief political advisor during the campaign, was wrong. So that's something that Bannon and his team and Republicans are going to have to factor into the thinking as they go into 2018. How much of this primary battle stuff do they want to do? How much of this Civil War stuff do they want to do? And what other seats could it cost them?
Yeah, and I've talked to the Senate Majority Leader about this and about Bannon backing other anti-establishment candidates that are often at odds with what the party would like to do. He wouldn't even say his name, if you remember that. But he noted the person you mentioned is how he referred to Bannon, has picked a lot of losers. And tonight this is going to be a mixed night for Mitch McConnell. He loses a critical vote, at least for a couple of years, if not more long-term in the Senate. But he now has had, proof of his feeling that Steve Bannon is not helpful to the party.
Well, there's that, and there's also the more important consideration for Mitch McConnell, who is thinking very much about the 2018 midterm elections. Having Roy Moore serving in the United States Senate might have cost multiple seats for Republicans. You can't know It's all hypotheticals as you play it out. But having Roy Moore as a sitting U.S. Senator, because we can disabuse ourselves of any notion that he was going to be kicked out or removed or what have you if he got elected, having Roy Moore as a sitting U.S. Senator was going to be trouble for the rest of his party, because guess what? Not every state is as Republican as Alabama, and not every state is as accommodating of the views of Roy Moore as Alabama might be. And when you take that show on the road and Democrats start pushing Roy Moore across the country, that could have cost McConnell other seats. So I think from that perspective and what he's most concerned about, which is holding that majority, maybe even growing it by a seat or two, this is important. Winning is always better than losing. We call this the salmon rule in politics. Winning is always better than losing, but this may be one where the silver lining is quite considerable.
Okay, so right now when the GOP tries to get things done on the Hill, they can only lose 2 votes, because then you've got the vice president to be a tiebreaker there in the Senate if they need him. Now they're down to 1. Does this now mean essentially one Republican senator is going to be able to derail anything, whether you get a contrarian libertarian like Rand Paul, or often Lisa Murkowski, or Susan Collins? It seems like you're always trying to kind of hold that together if you're the GOP, that coalition. But now they're down to 1.
Susan Collins' Christmas list will be fulfilled, I predict. Whatever it is that she desires is coming her way, because as Republicans think about how do you get things done, and you can, as you say, they can lose 2. But now, after we get into the new Senate, after these results are certified in a couple of weeks, and you get on to what the new look Senate is, then they'll be down to only being able to lose 1. That's not going to affect them as they try to do this jam through at the very end of the year, because they're going to have a minute right here. It's going to put a lot of pressure on them, more pressure on the taxes, on the must-pass end-of-year stuff that's so crucial. But yeah, of course, in the next year, whatever has to be done, it's an election year, they're not going to do much. But whatever has to be done, each of those senators is going to feel more like they have a veto than ever before.
Yeah, okay, so with that in mind, in the power play, and the president had often tweeted and talked about the fact that we need this vote in the Senate, accusing Doug Jones of being bad on crime and the border and all kinds of things. But our voter analysis, our Fox News voter analysis, I think you gave it the acronym earlier tonight, FNVA. FNVA. In talking to people about what was most important to them, number 1, candidates' morality came out on top with 92% when asked to kind of rank these different options they had. Second was the party control of the Senate. So it sounds like people's issues about morality trumped the day, no pun intended, when it came to listening to the president about losing control of the Senate for the GOP.
Well, let's be plain about it. For the people of Alabama, who are overwhelmingly conservative Republicans politically, this was a choice between the United States Senate and also bringing discredit to their state, looking silly, looking ridiculous. And I would just point out, Alabama is only a generation or 2 removed from a time when its name was tied to infamy, when it was tied to George Wallace, when it was tied to avowed enthusiastic segregation. Kookism is not something that Alabamians are particularly interested in associating themselves with. That's why Roy Moore in the past was not only removed from office, but struggled in statewide races. And that's why when you put the added part on about the sex scandal, then it just, I think, becomes a no-go. And I think that's where you get those tens of thousands of write-in votes. We're saying, I'm not going to vote for the Democrat, but I think it's important. They're saying, I want you to know I was here.
Exactly.
I want you to know I was here. And if you wouldn't have failed me, I would have been there for you.
Yeah, and if at one point the numbers, and they'll change throughout the night and as we get more provisional votes and things counted, but at one point, it was a 9,000 vote margin. And if you've got 22,000 write-ins, those people were fired up. They wanted to be heard, but they didn't want to be attached to either one of these guys. So we're going to learn a lot more about who those names were, too. And I'm sure we're going to recognize many of them. Who knows?
I think Nick Saban, FTW.
Yeah. He and Jeff Sessions, I would imagine we're going to see a lot of that in there. All right. Chris Irwell, get a nap. Come back to D.C.
You bet.
Good to see you. All right, so what does the Alabama Senate race now say about Steve Bannon, conservatives versus the establishment Republicans? Fox News at Night spoke to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell recently about the former White House chief advisor over there, Steve Bannon, and here's what he said.
Back in 2010 and 2012, the person you mentioned and his allies succeeded in nominating 5 candidates who all lost. So we succeeded in 2014 and 2016 in defeating sure losers.
Okay, let's welcome our political panel tonight. Senior columnist from townhall.com and trial attorney Kurt Schlichter, and radio talk show host and Fox News contributor Richard Fowler. Great to see both of you tonight, gentlemen.
Good to be here, Shannon. Great to be here.
Okay, so on one hand, Mitch McConnell is not a happy camper tonight. He's lost a seat. But Richard, on the other hand, he might be doing a little bit of a victory dance because, as you heard with me there, he wouldn't even say Bannon's name. And he wanted to say, this guy keeps picking losers. I'm right. I'm doing the right thing for the party. He's not.
I think that sounds about right. And I think one of the big winners tonight is the quote-unquote, Donald Trump likes to call them the swamp, but establishment Republicans. Because remember, at the beginning of this all, they wanted Luther Strange. They lost that race. And then you saw establishment Republicans, including Richard Shelby, the senior senator from Alabama, saying, hey, listen, don't vote for this guy. I'm not voting for this guy. And this sort of speaks to the larger problem that the Republican Party has, is now that Donald Trump is in the White House, who is, I would argue, part of the farther left fringe of the party, and I think he is connected synonymously with Steve Bannon, the biggest problem they have now is how do they talk to suburban voters? How do they talk to suburban voters of Virginia? We found out they couldn't do that, and now we found out they can't talk to suburban voters in Alabama. And this is very problematic for the Republican Party moving forward, especially as we look to getting Trump's agenda through and the 2018 election.
Yeah, I feel like I can already hear Kurt chuckling. I mean, this was such a unique race. I think it's hard to draw, too many generalities from it, Kirk. I mean, but in the end, people did say, according to our analysis and our data, that morality mattered to them over party.
Well, it sure did. Shannon, let's be really clear here, and let's not try and sugarcoat it. We Republicans lost. We lost a seat we should have won. Who lost it? We need to figure that out and figure out how to fix it for next year. We lost because the establishment tried to jam an establishment candidate down the throats of the Alabama voters in the primary, and they rebelled. And they nominated a kook, a nut. Roy Moore was a terrible candidate. He was a terrible candidate before, and he was a terrible candidate especially after the revelations came out. So we have problems on both sides. The conservative insurgents are sick and tired of not being listened to. The establishment in Washington is sick and tired of having the voters out beyond the Beltway trying to have input. We need to come together. We need to come together, and we need to do it quick, because we need to learn the lessons of Virginia and the lessons of Alabama, which is our voters are not going to show up if we don't give them a proper choice, and we didn't do that. We need to make lemons out of this, lemonade out of these lemons, Shannon, and we got a lot of lemons tonight.
Okay, we are awaiting Roy Moore, who it appears tonight has been defeated, the GOP nominee in Alabama for the U.S. Senate, so we're going to keep an eye on that. We will go there live to hear from him and hear his take on this tonight as soon as that happens. But in the meantime, Richard, it's interesting. We looked at a lot of data that was coming at us today from voters and folks down in Alabama. It was interesting that a lot of people said they stayed home because of these allegations involving Moore. They didn't want to vote at all. And then we had the 22,000 plus who showed up just to write in a name, including Senator Shelby, as you mentioned, because they wanted to be heard in this whole thing, but they didn't want to have to apparently vote for either one of these candidates they found unacceptable.
Well, I think that's very interesting, right? This 22,000 number is very interesting. Also, the fact that Doug Jones won this race, I think right now we're looking at about 10,000 votes. More will come in, obviously, as you count provisionals and so on and so forth. But I think it speaks to the larger problem that Donald Trump's going to have. Remember, Donald Trump wholeheartedly embraced Roy Moore as a candidate, even though, as my colleague says, he was a kook. But he was a kook that won overwhelmingly in the primary against Luther Strange. So that speaks to the fact that I think Republicans are having a bit of a problem in coming together. And I think what makes it so hard.
It's important to note, though, there were none of these allegations against Moore when that happened. None of those were public, because that makes a huge difference. Had they been public during that earlier primary vote, the GOP may have decided on somebody else to head to tonight.
I hear what you're saying, but let's also remember that Roy Moore is guilty for saying comments like LGBTQ people should be put to death. So his rhetoric has been problematic way before we found out that he engages in some level of pedophilia.
I'm not sure that he said those exact words. We need to do a fact check on that. Kurt,
I think I'm almost right, but I think I quoted
we'll double check that.
Roy Moore was a terrifically flawed candidate, and I think we ought to be honest with ourselves and say that. Even though he was terrifically flawed, he almost pulled this out. He almost won. But we need to, as Republicans, we need to learn from this. We're having a civil war in our party between the establishment and the conservative insurgents, and it's time that we come to a resolution. The establishment needs to understand the people outside of Washington, D.C. want to be heard. They don't want amnesty. They don't want corporate welfare. They don't want all this other nonsense that we've been seeing. Listen to the people and come together and put candidates forward who aren't decisively flawed.
So where does President Trump fall? Is he part of the conservative establishment, or is he part of the insurgency?
Well, and
that's
that's been an interesting
question, and
that has been a tough part of the question, because this race has been all over the place with Bannon and the president on different sides of everything. And by the way,
part of the larger problem.
Yeah, and we see people now coming to the microphone, so we expect that we'll hear from Roy Moore shortly. In the meantime, Richard and Kurt, if you will stick around for us, we do want to check in at Moore headquarters and find out when we're going to hear from the judge. In the meantime, let's check in with correspondent Peter Ducey. He is there in Montgomery. He's been following this today. And Peter, correct me, because I remember earlier today we got some emails from you when you said this campaign, and I don't know exactly who it was, and correct me on the words, but something about we're going to win tonight, it's a lock, it's a landslide. That's not exactly how this has turned out. Why were they so sure earlier today?
Shannon, this is the most extensive word that we've gotten from the campaign right now. The chairman is speaking as I am, but he just came out to say that the night is not over for the Moore supporters who are gathered here, because they are hoping to get the margin within 0.5% to trigger an automatic recount. This is the first official mention of the possibility of a recount that we have heard from here, but they're talking about a recount, and they are not talking about any kind of a concession. So we know that Judge Moore has been here at one point. They did turn off the TV. They stopped showing the New York Times tracker of all the counties that were coming in blue that led the networks to call it. And actually, they came out and asked the people here to keep the faith, and they started singing hymns. I took notes. There was, "Great is thy faithfulness, how great thou art. All hail the power of Jesus, his name." The very quiet crowd was singing with a group of young people who were up on the stage, but things are not over the way that the Moore campaign sees it right now. To that end, though, up on Capitol Hill, I am also getting some new reaction tonight. And you know what? Here's Roy Moore, Shannon.
Let's listen in, Peter.
Thank you. You know, I really want to thank you for coming tonight, and realize when the vote is this close that it's not over. And we still got to go by the rules about this recount provision. And the Secretary of State has explained it to us, and we're expecting that the press will go up there and talk to them to find out what the situation is. But we also know that God is always in control. You know, part of the problem with this campaign is we've been painted in an unfavorable and unfaithful light. We've been put in a hole, if you will, and it reminds me of a passage in Psalm 40. I waited patiently for the Lord. That's what we've got to do. And he inclined to me and heard my cry, and brought us up also out of a horrible pit, out of miry clay, and set my feet on the rock, and established my goings, and put a new song in our mouth, even praise unto our God. Many shall see it and hear it, and shall be moved by that, if you will. And that's what we've got to do, is wait on God and let this process play out. I know it's late. We can't wait and have everybody wait till after 11 o'clock. But the votes are still coming in, and we're looking at that. May God bless you as you go on. May He give you a safe journey. And thank you for coming tonight. It's not over, and it's going to take some time. Thank you.
Okay, so not a concession speech from Roy Moore tonight, although we and just about every other outlet there has called this race for Doug Jones. As you heard the Secretary of State on earlier tonight, he did say to us that under Alabama law, if the vote is within a 0.5 percentage point, it does qualify for a recount. Tonight, that seems to be what Moore is hinting at, saying this is not over. He is not conceding. There are provisional ballots and other things that will take some time to sift through. Not every vote is in, far from it. And his camp is hoping for a bit of a miracle, it sounds like, quoting from the Bible from Psalm 40, talking about God hearing his cry, inclining to hear his cry, to lift him out of the, quote, miry clay. And essentially what they're doing is hoping on what would be their last hope here is to get this vote within a half percentage point and somehow be able to trigger that recount. Brett Baer has been leading our coverage tonight from the Fox News Decision Desk, joins us now. All right, Brett, not a concession tonight.
No, there are other Bible verses that say it's over. I tell you what, I think that the numbers that we're looking at, it could be 3, could be 4 points. Just looking at the projections right now, the raw vote total is roughly 9,000. We had 22,044 write-ins. You talked with Chris Steyerwalt earlier about this. 22,000, that's double the difference. And there you see the lead is increasing on the raw vote total, 670 now to 649. Just looking at the map, looking where the votes are, it doesn't seem like it's going to get to that 0.5%, not even close. More like it's expanding and not contracting. So I think that eventually you're going to see from the Moore campaign a concession.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, you know, in watching all the data that we were getting in this Fox News voter analysis, one of the groups we were really watching were white evangelicals, because I think they went by 90% or more for Mitt Romney in the last big race there, the presidential race. Tonight, the split was for Moore 74%, Jones 22%. So it wasn't enough to put Moore over the top, at least not unless something miraculous happens with what's remaining to come in. But certainly a drop off from what we saw for Mitt Romney. And you'll remember there was a lot of conversation about whether evangelicals would vote for a Mormon candidate. Even less of them felt like voting for Roy Moore tonight, apparently.
No, that's true. And listen, I just listened to the other conversation. This is apples and oranges to the Virginia race. I mean, it's just completely different. This was a very flawed candidate. These allegations overwhelmed all of the coverage. And his first interview with Sean Hannity was really bad as far as a candidate making a pitch or trying to stop the bleeding on a story that was getting out of hand for his campaign. Now, he fought back in part because of all of the other allegations that were flying and accusations and resignations that were happening on the Democratic side and in the world of Hollywood. But it overwhelmed, and just the write-ins alone, and you saw the president's tweet mentioning that number in what was actually a very gracious tweet, if you think about where the president has been on commenting on some of these races.
Yeah, the GOP certainly did not want to lose a Senate seat. That's not helpful for Supreme Court nominations or major legislation or anything else they have going on over there. But in a way, does this eliminate some sort of headache that they would have had to deal with moving forward? Because apparently the word was there was going to be a 10 a.m. meeting tomorrow with the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to get everybody in the GOP on the same page if Roy Moore won. Because, you know, we heard so much conversation about, do they seat him right away? Do they seat him, refer him to the Ethics Committee? What do they do? At least for now, they've lost a vote, but they don't have to deal with that part of the conversation.
Exactly. And listen, over the past few days, you've seen the mantra that is starting to develop about the president's accusers and calls for him to resign and investigations. And I think you're going to see more of that. If you had Roy Moore in that seat, the GOP establishment believed that that was going to be a real problem in 2018. Doug Jones is going to be a Democrat. He's probably going to hold the line on some things. But if he wants to get reelected in 2020, he's going to have to check the box in what Alabama believes, at least some of that. Because if you put policies of the Trump agenda up for a vote in Alabama, it would be an overwhelming win.
Yeah, and I heard somebody refer to him tonight. You may remember who this was. I can't remember off the top of my head. As potentially, a Senator Manchin out of Alabama, because he is also somebody who is a conservative, moderately conservative Democrat. He knows how the voters at home feel. And I was there in West Virginia covering a Senate race when he ran. And there were people on both sides of the aisle who loved him, who felt like he was true to West Virginia values, that he wasn't going to just toe the party line. Do you think that's the space that Doug Jones is going to be forced into if he wants to be successful in 2 years?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Manchin, Heidi Heitkamp, Joe Donnelly fits all of that. So far, we should point out, Democrats have held the line when the Democratic leadership has said vote this way, even not discussing tax reform, not to vote to argue tax reform on the Senate floor. So I think it'll be interesting to see how Doug Jones votes. I do believe that this race, as we called it, is going to turn out to be about 3 or 4 points. And I'll note that President Trump weighed in on 3 elections over the past 3 months. Luther Strange, Ed Gillespie, and Roy Moore. All three of them are losses. Now, does it tie directly to President Trump, or does it tie to Steve Bannon playing the other side? We don't know how that's going to fall out, but the first reaction from the president was to congratulate Jones and say the write-ins caused this loss.
Yeah, and as we get those final numbers in the coming weeks, we're going to learn a lot more about exactly how that all filters out, but unlikely at this point that the Roy Moore camp gets to the 0.5 percentage spacing between the two candidates that they need to get to a recount. So we'll continue to watch it. Excellent coverage as always tonight, Brett. Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon. We'll see you.
All right, let's bring back our panel, senior columnist from townhall.com and trial attorney Kurt Schlichter, and radio talk show host and Fox News contributor Richard Fowler. They have their winners and losers from tonight. We touched on this a little bit. Kurt, I'll start with you. Who are the winners and losers now that Doug Jones, it appears, has won the seat?
Wow. I think in a way Mitch McConnell's a loser. He's going to get a lot of blame from the conservative insurgents for this because he pushed Luther Strange when they could have let Mo Brooks go through. Also, he's going to have to thread the needle with 51 votes instead of 52. So it's going to be tough. But let's look at him. Steve Bannon has lost. Steve Bannon brought Roy Moore in, pushed Roy Moore, and Roy Moore stumbled. He managed to lose Alabama. I'm still trying to wrap my head about that. Alabama, another big loser are people who like the Second Amendment, people who don't like abortion, people who don't like amnesty. Conservative voters have lost an important voice. This is not a good night. Bad nights happen.
Yeah, I believe
but we got another one coming up in a year.
Yes, it's never over. As you all know, and as the president tweeted tonight, it never ends because there's always another election for us to talk about.
Ends.
All right, Richard, walk us through your winners and losers with Jones being the winner tonight.
Well, I think with Jones the winner, I think I will add to my list. I think black voters were a big winner tonight because they once again showed up for the Democratic Party in a major way. The other one is the Washington Post, who was the first sort of publication to roll out a story about Roy Moore, and so I think they're a big winner tonight. And the third big winner is the establishment. And to go off of what Brett was just saying a couple moments ago is this: they no longer have to worry about sort of the guy sleeping downstairs, which was Roy Moore. Now that he is not going to be in the Senate chambers, they can try their best to delete him from their memory and hope that Democrats don't bring him back up for all of the things was wrong with his candidacy. And in the previous segment, I do want to correct myself. The comment that he made was that being gay is illegal and not put to death. So to correct myself.
Yes. Thank you, and credit to you, because we always want to make sure that people know exactly what is factual. And yes, and it is a great characteristic for us all when we've made mistakes to admit them. So thank you, Richard, for clarifying on that.
Absolutely.
I know that you have said also you think the president's a loser here, and I want to ask you both because this is interesting. It now sets up this weird dynamic between Bannon, the president, Mitch McConnell. It's kind of a weird stew as they moved back and forth in supporting these different candidates. I didn't see Steve Bannon tonight. I didn't hear from him, so I don't know what his take on this race is going to be. But Kurt, he was all in.
He's probably out back at the Jones or the Moore rally, pounding his head into the wall. I think, look, Donald Trump occupies this interesting space where he triangulates between the Steve Bannon wing and the Mitch McConnell wing, and he goes back and forth, and he plays with them both. I mean, he supported Luther Strange, then when Luther Strange lost, he went and supported Roy Moore to keep that seat. I don't think Donald Trump's going to get any blame from the conservative voters about this. I think they've taken kind of Donald Trump out of this equation. It was very much a Roy Moore-centric vote. Not that we shouldn't learn from it, but Roy Moore was a uniquely flawed candidate, and he managed to lose a uniquely Republican state. I don't think Donald Trump's going to get any blame, at least not from Republicans. And if Democrats try and cast it on him, I don't know if it's going to really resonate.
I beg to differ on this, and the reason why is that I think Donald Trump really wholeheartedly embraced this guy. If you look at other Republicans, including, I think the model example is Senator Shelby from the state of Alabama, who was like, I won't even vote for this guy, even though he's from my state. I'd rather give this seat to a Democrat than to give it to Roy Moore. And the president, on the other hand, had a rally just outside of the borders of Alabama. He did robocalls into the state. He forced the party to, after the party disengaged, to re-engage in the state. And these are all things that are connected clearly to President Trump, not to mention all the tweets endorsing Roy Moore. So it's hard now to split him from Roy Moore or to split him from Steve Bannon, because what we've seen in this race is they followed the Steve Bannon playbook down to the T. Remember, in the Virginia race, they were like, oh, it's because they didn't embrace Trump. Roy Moore did all of that, and he still lost.
Well, but again, we do have to remind folks that in case you've been under a rock, this has been a very unusual race. And, you know, Kurt, really quickly, I want to ask you before we go, do Democrats risk missing the point or reading too much into it if they say this is a referendum on Trump?
I think they do. So I want to encourage them to do that, because I love it when Democrats make mistakes.
Listen to him.
As I was taught at Fort Benning, never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. The thing I don't want is Republicans to make a mistake. I don't want us to think, oh, well, this was just Roy Moore. Oh, well, this was just a one-off. There are a lot of things going on here. And I think Richard had a really good point. Black voters were energized, and they came out and they made their voice heard.
Yeah,
and we need to understand that a lot of people who sometimes we lazily count on to not vote are engaged. That means we have to engage Republican voters. We have to reach out to everyone who can be conservative, of all colors, of all persuasions, of all groups, and we need to work, because if we don't work, we're going to get creamed next year.
No, I think
that's the lesson we need to take away.
We got to leave it there, but it's a good lesson for either party to assume that any particular voting bloc is always going to be with you is a mistake, and that is portrayed and proven in races all over the place. So thank you guys both very much. If you'll stick around for us, we're going to go back to Moore headquarters where the judge came out. He did not concede. Correspondent Peter Ducey is here. And Peter, we had started this conversation about earlier in the day that they were saying to you that they felt like this was sort of a slam dunk. What went wrong? How was their analysis so off?
Shannon, it was a little bit noisy, and so I couldn't really hear your question, but I can tell you that the room, because nobody expects more to come out, and because they think that the resolution for this race is going to come in the morning, it is finally starting to empty out. And really, the room that was completely quiet as everybody was getting text alerts and seeing on Twitter that the networks were calling the race, it never really picked back up until Moore came out and said it is not over. It is a different story, though, up on Capitol Hill. In fact, I just got a text message from a very senior GOP source on the Hill who thinks that this is Mitch McConnell's fault, but not for the reason that everybody has been saying, not for necessarily the same reason that Steve Bannon and his allies think. This source on the Hill thinks that it goes all the way back to when there were 3 people still in the primary before it was a runoff, Luther Strange, Roy Moore, and Mo Brooks, and that essentially when Mitch McConnell came in to try to defeat Mo Brooks and boost Luther Strange, the McConnell brand was so toxic in Alabama that it ended up diminishing Luther Strange and giving rise to Judge Roy Moore, who tonight is not giving up. Shannon.
Okay, yeah, we're going to watch and see it. It appears right now as we're getting more votes in, that gap between the two candidates is widening. Again, as a reminder, Roy Moore did not concede tonight. He wants to try to see if this vote will get within that 0.5 percentage point between the two primary candidates. If it does, that could potentially trigger a recount. He told folks tonight this was not over. He was going to wait for that and wait to see. So as they disperse on their side, many of them believing it is unresolved. But we'll see, because it doesn't look like the votes are moving in that direction. There are a lot still to come in and to be counted, so we'll let you know. All right, with Doug Jones winning tonight, the balance of the power in the Senate gets tighter. 51 Republicans, 49 Democrats. What happens now? There is a lot on the agenda. Let's check back in with Chris Stirewalt, our Fox News politics editor, to see where we go from here. And again, there are so many things that are not easy to get past. We still have to get tax reform done. The goal is to get that done before Doug Jones would ever be seated. But immigration, there are so many other things. Probably a Supreme Court confirmation next year. And that one vote margin just gets that much tougher.
What do you know? You know? If you,
I'm just saying, stand by.
See.
Hashtag stand by.
One thing about the data, if I could just revert to my decision desk mode for one quick second. We have all the vote in now that we're going to have tonight. But there are still going to be contested ballots that will be part of the canvass that they will go through. We would expect if not the preponderance of them, but the bulk of them to be probably from places where Jones would do better. You tend to find more contested balance in lower income areas, minority areas. You tend to have more. These are going to be areas where he should do better. So, yes, we would expect the margin to grow out a little bit probably for Jones, and it doesn't look like there's any way that ends up within a half a point.
Yeah, it looks like it continues to move in the other direction. At what point would you expect him to come forward and make that concession? Do you think we get it tomorrow?
Well, based on Roy Moore's career, I wouldn't be surprised if he starts fundraising for a recount push.
Well, if you're not within a half a point under Alabama law, it's not happening.
Yeah, but you could raise money for a lot. You could raise money for a lot of things. And, you know, one of the things about American politics is even in defeat, it doesn't mean you can't get rich off losing. And only in, as Don King would say, only in America can you make a good living off of being bad at politics.
Many have proven that. Many have proven that, and we have tracked them and followed their careers. All right, Chris, we got to leave it there at the decision desk. Thank you very much for all of your hard work tonight. We've got other big non-election news we'll get to right after this break.